With the release of the final shape in Destiny 2 the video game, we also received a brand new subclass, Prismatic. It is the best subclass in the entire game across all classes. Or is it? Maybe, just maybe, there exists a subclass with more potency, more survivability, more pizzazz. That subclass does exist. It's been under our noses this whole time. Now enough foreplay, enough teasing, enough edging. You likely already know what subclass I'm talking about. It was right there in the title, for God's sake. It is of course Void Warlock. Now, we already know Void Warlock is good. It's been good since its launch. Yet I hardly see anyone running it, and even if they do, it's never with the same setup as I've got here today. Now what I'll be showing you guys is something I've been working on for many months now. I've been running this build, perfecting it, changing things. I've been trying to optimize the potency and the ease of use, trying to find that right balance, if you know what I mean. And the best part of this build is that anyone can do it. It's pretty much mostly free to play. So if you're a brokey, just like me, then you can bloody use this. Except I'm a brokey because I'm not free to play. This game has taken too much money from me already. And there are so many different parts of this build that you can change and make your own. We'll get into it deeper a bit later, but yeah, there's a lot you can change. Now without further ado, let's get into the build. Now starting with the aspects, I've gone with Feed the Void. That will essentially just improve your Devour. It will also give you Devour just by getting an ability kill. Now the base Devour, it can refresh to 10 seconds after each kill you get. It also heals you a little bit and grants you grenade energy. However, when you have Feed the Void equipped, you get some additional benefits. Instead of just healing you a little bit, it gives you your full health. No matter what your HP is, it gives you full health to the max. That's wild. And the grenade energy you get is improved. When we cover the grenades a bit later, I'm going to talk about how much grenade energy you get per kill when you have Devour active, depending on the nade you have on. And the second aspect that I'm using is Child of the Old Gods. This is essentially a little purple pet. All you gotta do is pop your class ability, and then it will travel to the first enemy you shoot. It will then weaken everything in its fairly large radius. I believe it's like 12.5 meters or something. It does do damage over time, but the damage isn't really substantial. You probably won't even notice it. But when this little pet is leeching a target, it grants you grenade energy and melee energy when you do have a healing rift on. But if you have an empowering rift on, it gives you a bit of health. I'm just going to say it now, you don't want to be using the empowering rift. The healing isn't crazy. You want to be using the rift for the more ability energy. Even then, the ability energy isn't insane. It's just a nice passive buff to your ability regen, essentially. Now, if you defeat a target which your little pet is giving guac to, it will grant you class ability energy, so you can get him back up and sucking off more enemies. This pair of aspects, very good together. The last aspect is fine with a certain exotic, but we're not using that exotic. I'll talk about which exotic I'm using in a minute. Let's move on to the fragments first. Firstly, we've got a pretty neutral fragment. It's in almost every Void build ever used. We are of course talking about Echo of Instability. This will give your Void weapons volatile rounds for 11 seconds after getting a grenade kill. As well as being very good for ad clearing, volatile rounds gives you anti-barrier potential, so you can, be the anti-barrier. The next fragment is Echo of Starvation. This will grant you Devour just for picking up an orb or a Void Breach. A Void Breach is essentially just a cosmic minge. It gives you class ability when you pick it up. We'll talk about how to actually spawn them in a bit later on. But you might be questioning now, why do we need this fragment? We've already got Feed the Void on. My friend, the more ways you have to proc Devour, the better. Trust me, there may be a case where you just can't kill anything quick enough to get your health back and you need to survive, so you gotta bloody get Devour going. So alls you need is to pick up an orb or a purple Vijay, and then boom, you're back in the fight. This really does make the build that much more consistent and a lot more intuitive. Very good fragment, don't sleep on it. The next fragment is also very much known for being a very solid pick. We shall be using Echo of Undermining. This essentially just lets your grenades weaken anything it hits. Even if it's just 1 HP, the enemy will become weakened. And you'll probably be able to tell soon enough that we are very much diving into trying to weaken as many enemies as we can. You'll see in a minute why we are weakening so much shit. The last fragment is Echo of Harvest. It's the only fragment where I'd say it's not as required as the rest of them, but essentially it will just create an orb and a Void Breach, a Vussy if you will, just for defeating a weakened target, which we will be doing quite a lot. That means a single grenade kill will give you 2 orbs due to some armor mods we have on, and a Void Breach. That is nuts. Now the reason I say this fragment isn't as required is because it does have a 10-second cooldown, which in all honesty, it's not that bad when you're actually playing. You could replace replace this fragment with something like Echo of Persistence. That will just let you hold your Devour for 15 seconds rather than 10. That 5 seconds can make a difference in higher end content, to be honest. It is quite nice to have. But in anything other than maybe GMs, let's say, you're not going to need it just because of the amount of orbs we're going to be making. So sticking to this combination of fragments and aspects, let's look at some of the base abilities that we're going to be using. For the super, I mainly use Nova Bomb Cataclysm. This is the one that just goes there, does big boy damage, and then some Seekers come out. They do big boy damage. It actually got buffed with the release of the final shape. I believe it was 8 Seekers rather than 6. And they did something weird with the tracking and how they don't automatically blow up or something. It feels a lot nicer now. Nova Warp, I wouldn't say it's worth using at all. You are probably better off using your abilities rather than Nova Warp for ad clearing. It can be nice for traversal, I guess, getting from A to B. But then you just got eager edge swords for that. So what the hell? In raid settings where there are 6 different people shooting the same boss, it might be worth using Nova Bomb Vortex. Unlike Cataclysm, this one doesn't actually block your shots. It's happened to me many times where I throw my Nova Bomb out and then all my teammates are like, "Yo, Mega, what are you doing? You're blocking my shots, dude." And I'm just like, "Bro, I'm sorry, it's a Nova Bomb." And then they're all like, "This is totally not tubular, dude." So just don't use this Nova Bomb if you're doing a raid boss, I'd say. Now, I've already explained that we're going to be using Healing Rift rather than Empowering Rift. The jump doesn't matter, but I do use Burst Glide personally. The melee isn't great, does have one very niche use. I'll let you guys know about that soon. And it's the only bloody melee we have, so, you know, you don't have much of a choice. Now, for the grenades, remember when I said Feed the Void gives varying nade energy depending on what nade you're using? Let's take a quick look into that now. Vortex is a very popular nade amongst many. However, I will say it did get nerfed many months ago, namely the amount of grenade energy you get from Feed the Void. It only gives roughly 7.5% grenade energy when you get a kill on a red bar. An orange bar will give 11.6%, a yellow bar will give 13.75%, and a boss or a champion or a guardian will give 20%. These numbers aren't great, and they're even lower without Feed the Void on. I'm not going to go through every single nade's percentage. Just know that the quicker the nade can get all its damage off, the more it benefits from the nade regen from Feed the Void. That's why personally my favorite pick is Scatter Grenade. It gets double the regen from Feed the Void compared to Vortex Grenade, and it actually does pretty respectable damage. Axiom Bolts are a no-go, unfortunately. They don't hit hard enough. They don't do enough damage. They don't even send out enough Seekers, in my opinion. Magnetic nades aren't terrible. They're essentially just a worse scatter grenade. Unless you're using handheld supernova, but that requires a different aspect, and that's just a whole different build completely. Void Spike is cheeks. Void Wall is very similar to Vortex in terms of regen from Devour and Feed the Void. Suppressor Grenade isn't great. There is a niche play with it. I'll get into that later. I know I keep on saying I'll get into that later a lot, but trust me, I will. Now, with all of the subclass sorted out, all of the abilities, let's take a look at the exotic of choice. We will be using Nezarec Sins. Its exotic perk reads, void damage kills, increase ability energy recharge rate. That's extremely vague, so what the hell does that even mean? When you get any form of void kill, it gives you 2.5 seconds of abyssal extractors. I hope I said that right. This buff can be extended to 20 seconds. Now, what does the buff actually do? It gives you 300% base, grenade, and melee energy recharge rate, and it also gives you 200% super and rift base energy recharge rate. That is actually really good. These buffs actually don't stack with your armor stats, so a higher discipline stat won't turn that 300% into a 600%, for instance. But still, the exotic regen is definitely noticeable, and it's very intuitive. Like, it just happens. You don't even need to think about it. Now, to some of you, it might not sound too crazy getting your grenade and melee 3 times as quick and your rift twice as quick, but when you stack it on top of stuff like Devour and some of the armor mods, it can be pretty insane. Now, speaking of armor mods, let's go through those now. Starting with the helmet, we have the usual siphon mods, just for more orbs. You get 2 kills with a void weapon, you get an orb. Easy. We also have heavy ammo finder for, well, you know, more heavy, and we've also got Ashes to Assets, which will let us spam our supers just by getting grenade kills. Moving on to the arms, we have 2 firepower mods. This mod will just let us spawn in orbs for each grenade kill we get. I use 2 here because if you only have 1, you have a 10-second cooldown. Having 2 halves it, making it 5 seconds. And with the rest of the mod setup, we are going to be getting our nades within 5 seconds. It might even be worth using 3 firepowers, but I do think that's slightly overkill. Having 2 mods will also increase the potency of the orb. The difference is so tiny. It goes from a 0.8% to 0.1% 0.1% increase in super energy. It's nothing crazy. We also have bolstering detonation on the arms. You can for sure swap this out for a void reloader. In fact, I did use a void reloader until I changed my main weapon. Again, we'll get into that in a sec, but either works. You don't really need the class ability energy too much. You're not going to be putting so many rifts down because the Child of the Old Gods has so much uptime anyway. The chest piece is mainly used for resistances, nothing special here. The legs will have double void surges, big boy damage, and a single innovation for 10% grenade energy on orb pickup. We don't use recuperation here because Devour will obviously get us to full health anyway. Any other build you'd be using recuperation, and you know we want to spam the grenades as much as we can. We're not trying to spam the melee, it's ass. We're not trying to spam the class ability really. Again, the Child of the Old Gods has so much uptime anyway. By the time it goes away, you're going to have another one ready. On the class item, we have Bomber for 12% grenade energy when we pop a rift. Time dilation so that we can just hold our surges for longer. But in all honesty, you don't really need this due to the amount of orbs we're going to be making anyway. You could probably switch it out for Reaper. I think I just might. All you have to do is put your class ability down and then get a kill within 10 seconds and you get an orb. It has to be a weapon kill, sorry, not just any kill. And I believe it's got a 10-second cooldown or something like that. It's not that deep. It's another orb. It's nice. And finally, we have Powerful Attraction. This is just so we put a rift down. Any orb in a 12.5 meter radius gets picked up. I wish this worked for the Vussies, the Void Breaches. That would be very nice. Maybe a future buff that Bungie might do, hopefully. All of these mods together, they will all ensure that we have maximum grenade regen. You can probably go a step further and dive into grenade kickstart and using your armor charge to get your nade back rather than surges. But to be honest, I do very much prefer the surges, and grenade kickstart I do think is going to be a bit overkill. So that's all the armor mods out the way. There is some leeway, of course. You don't have to use all of these, but these are the ones I recommend the most. Now for the weapons. The kinetic slot in this build doesn't really matter. I sort of just use this slot as a special ammo, high health, chunking weapon. Typically I'd use Mountaintop or Supremacy, sometimes Izanagi, and maybe, just maybe, even a chill clip fusion. You know, that's just me. The heavy weapon also doesn't really matter. I'd say just make sure it is void. The same rule pretty much applies for the energy weapon really. As long as it's void, you're chilling. My personal favorite is Collective Obligation, believe it or not. It's an exotic reward from the Vow of the Disciple raid. This one came out with Witch Queen. It's a pulse rifle, so it did receive the Mahusive buff that came with the final shape. The exotic trait on it reads, this weapon leeches void debuffs when damaging targets that are suppressed, weakened, or volatile. Once charged, you just need to press the button to swap firing modes. In this mode, damage from this weapon applies the same void debuffs that were leeched. Now essentially, it's pretty much how it sounds. You shoot an enemy that's volatile, you shoot one that's weakened, you shoot one that's suppressed, you hold reload, and then anything you shoot gets those debuffs applied to them. And it doesn't have to be 3 separate targets either. If one target has, let's say, volatile and weaken, you just shoot him and then you get volatile and weaken ready. You don't need all 3 to charge it, you only need 1, so you can literally just get volatile rounds by shooting something that's already volatile. You can get volatile weakening rounds, which is what you'll see the most with this build. You're never really going to see suppressor rounds. I do think if the Tormentor suppresses you, that does charge your weapon. I believe that's a hidden interaction. Now this is really good because you might fall into a situation where you accidentally throw your nade into nothing. Your Void Soul has pissed off somewhere far. But with this weapon, you will always have volatile and weaken ready on command, essentially. I believe it gives you the buff for around 13 seconds. That is more than enough time to get all your abilities back. So you're not completely helpless without your abilities, you've still got some pretty good ad clear. And its other unique perk is called Umbral Sustenances. Umbral Sustenance. Yep, that's the one. This weapon's magazine is automatically reloaded when you gain Devour, avoid Overshield, or become invisible. Now with this build, obviously we're gaining Devour like Hotcake or Hot Pies. Can't remember. It's one of them. It's either Hotcake or Hot Pies. It definitely wouldn't be Hot Steamy Buns. But yeah, this is the reason why I said you don't really need to run Void Reloader if you got this weapon, because you're literally never reloading, like ever. Every single kill you get reloads your weapon. And if you're putting your whole entire mag into one enemy, then you shouldn't be using this pulse rifle anyway. So there's no scenario where you'd run out of ammo really. Obviously GMs are different. It's not as usable in GMs, I'd say. You're gonna have to run the Void Reloader. So this weapon in general is very, very good insurance, I'd say. You can rely on it. It's good backup. It also does really good damage. It is an exotic, so it does a lot more to red bars than legendaries. Now before, I did mention that there is a niche scenario where where the melee can be decent, and it's the scenario where if you throw your grenade into nothing, you have no abilities charged apart from your melee, you just hit your melee on something, they become volatile, then you can proc your volatile off them with the collective obligation, I mean. So then you have volatile rounds for 14 seconds. And before I said the suppressor nade does have a niche option, and that is also with this weapon here. If you're going up against something like Tormentors or Lucent Hive, maybe even Champions, or the new Subjugators, you can throw your suppressor nade, leech the suppressor debuff, and then suppress whatever you need on command. Very good against Tormentors, it stops them from rushing you. Good against Lucent Hive, stops them from, you know, going crazy. Now in any other case where you need to run an exotic kinetic or heavy, there are some good legendary void primaries you can use. Also benefiting from the pulse rifle buff, you can run Elsie's rifle. This one released from Into the Light, so it is free for all players. You don't need to own any expansions or anything. This weapon gets repulsor brace and frenzy, which I do think that's an incredible perk combination. It also gives you 5% grenade energy with each kill thanks to its origin trait. But maybe you want something else, another weapon, something close quarters. You can use the Fioritura 59. It's a lovely sidearm, feels really nice. Shoyura's Wrath. You want a hand cannon? You have the new Mahez. You want a special weapon? You can use the Truth Teller, Hollow Denial. You can literally pick any void weapon. You have a massive pool of great void weapons which will work with this build. So just pick your favorite and experiment with what you like. I just think collective obligation is the best. I also forgot to mention Graviton Lance. That is a very solid pick. I do think collective obligation does come on top of it, only because of its synergies with void. Now, everything up until now is completely future-proof. Unless something gets a massive nerf, this build will work in all future seasons or episodes, I guess now, and it will work bloody well. But this episode, we currently have access to a very juicy artifact with some juicy perks, starting with Elemental Siphon. Rapid final blows with a kinetic weapon or a weapon which matches your super creates an elemental pickup that also matches your super. So in our case, we're going to be getting rapid void weapon kills, and we're going to be making Vussies. That should help us get our class ability back quicker and also more ways to proc Devour. So that just makes the build that much more consistent, I'd say. And next up, we got Void Hegemony? Void Hegemony? Void Hegemony.
Hegemony.
Motherfucker. Void Hegemony. When you have a Void or Prismatic subclass on, defeating a weakened target gives you a small Void Overshield. Now the Void Overshield isn't crazy, it gives you a little bit, but when you start ramping up those kills, getting more than one, that's when you start building up a bigger Void Shield. I do like this one. It definitely nullifies the fact that you don't have Repulsor Brace with a weapon, for example. It lets you run another perk other than that. Very solid artifact perk. Next up is Expanding Abyss, which will just make your void sources deal increased damage to weakened targets. Obviously with this build we're going to be weakening a bunch of stuff. Essentially everything we shoot is just going to be weakened. This will make anything void deal even more damage than it already does. So they're going to be weakened, fine, but this episode specifically with this artifact perk, it weakens them even more, provided you're using void stuff to damage them. That applies to your super, your weapons, your abilities, literally anything void. I also believe that volatile, those volatile explosions also get buffed. I'm not entirely sure, don't hold me to that, but still very, very solid artifact perk. If you're not running it, you're throwing. With all these perks, it already takes one of the best builds, in my opinion, up a notch. Truly one of the builds of all time. Now in terms of the build stats, your armor stats, it doesn't really matter. I would just make sure you're running 100 resilience. That would obviously give you the maximum damage resistance. And the next stat I would try to max out, or at least get as high as you can, is discipline. The fragments a part of this build give quite a lot of negative stat points, but the stats themselves aren't really important. Recovery is nice for your rift regen, so I'd honestly just prioritize the stats with resilience first, then discipline, then recovery. Any other stat is borderline useless. I could explain here, but the video is just going to end up being like an hour. So if you guys do want me to go through which stats are actually important in PvP and in PvE, I will for sure get that done. I was planning on making that video, just let me know if you do want me to and I'll prioritize that one. Now back to the build. The gameplay loop is super easy to just get behind, you know, throw nades, pop rifts, shoot a bunch of shit. The Devour will keep you alive very well, and you can just spam your abilities like essentially how Ikora does. And yeah, that includes your super. You will be throwing a lot of Nova Bombs. The only place I wouldn't take this build as it is would be into a GM. This build is definitely heavily reliant on killing stuff. It relies on you actually going in there, picking up the orbs and the Vussies. A shoot to loot weapon can fix that, but you still won't be able to pick up the void breaches, because I'm pretty sure shoot to loot does not work with elemental pickups. I will definitely need to tweak a lot of things about this build to make it GM suitable. And yeah, I've said it before, I've used this build for many months now. It's always a good backbone build. Whenever I don't know what to use, I just use this one. It's consistently a very good pick in almost every single activity that I ever do, except PvP, of course. Don't bring this into PvP. So I do hope you guys give this build a try. Let me know how it feels in the comments. Also, let me know if you guys did like this format of build video. I am down to make more build videos. I got a bunch of builds. Thank you guys so much for stopping by and watching this for this long. I appreciate you incredibly. All right, that should be all from me. Thank you very much, and bye-bye now.